Here we are at NYSE, NYSE, New York Stock Exchange. I want to tell you a little bit, well, first let me tell you what it is, right? This is the financial center of American finance, right? It's pretty epic. This is what you see when you watch TV and the news, and the guy's standing here. This is what you see in the back, and you're right here, right on the same spot that the reporter stands on with his fancy microphone, telling you that this bad news or good news. Recently, a lot of bad news, but also, you know, a very essential part of who we are. This is it, New York Stock Exchange. It all started back here. I want to tell you a little bit about how this came to be, right? This building here dates back to 1903, but the story of American finance dates back to way before that. So, why is it called Wall Street? Because there was an actual wall there. Half the people in America know that. Everybody knows that. That's not the top story of the day, but I figured you should know. But one thing that I didn't know is that there are actual, the marks where the wall used to be are actually right here on this street. You can see it right there. These little wooden, flat things on the floor, you can actually see where the wall used to sit on. They built this wall because they wanted to protect them. The Dutch built this wall. They wanted to protect themselves from invading Indians, right? That would make sense. And also eventually the British. But they never really had to use the wall. No one tried to climb over it. This was actually, if you saw the wall from the other side, it was a 12-foot high wall made out of wood. And you wouldn't really be able to climb it because it was on an incline. It was like this, if you picture like a hill. So if you stood here, the wall would be a lot more than 12 foot high, you know. So it was a smart, very smart choice. I mean, I would be protecting myself from the Indians if I ripped them off too. So that was cool. So this is why we call it Wall Street. We settled that. And then I want to take you back to a very important agreement and what happened in this town. So after the British are gone, we start to see a lot of life in this area. The port starts to get really busy. Most of the life in the city happens below Canal Street, and there's a lot of trade happening. There's coffee being brought in. This is a strategic location. It's right by the harbor. We have imports and exports and people trading and doing business. And along with that, we got stock traders. Now, where are the stock traders trading? In this beautiful building? No, because it didn't come alive until 1903. So at that time, what they're using is the actual street. And that's really cool, right? They're just standing here, hanging out, trading their stocks and bonds. And in the summertime, that works. In the springtime, that works. In the fall time, that kind of works. But when the winter hits and the weather gets chilly, like it is today, you got to find some place to go. And so that posed a problem for these stock and bond traders that they couldn't really be out on the street doing this. So where do they go? The same place that we go today, to Starbucks. They found coffee houses and ale houses, and that's where they would start to do their business. Now that it's pretty charming, right? A bunch of people just gathering at an old coffee house in the 1700s, trading and doing business, chatting, drinking, you know, having a grand old time. But it's pretty unorganized. They figure we should have an auction system. Every other commodity has an auction system. We gotta have an auction system, man. So they put together this system and they find auctioneers. That works out pretty well, except that all these auctions are happening at the same time in all these different places. So they really couldn't really take full advantage of all the dealings that were happening because they were happening all over the place. There's way too much to do, way too much to trade, way too little time, and way too many places. And on top of that, they were also starting to rebel against the auctioneers who were taking in a piece of the pie. They took commission out of these trades. So they figure, what we're gonna do is we gotta cut them out of the system. So they hold a secret meeting. Okay, now this is pretty creepy. No, not creepy. It's pretty secretive. They hold a secret meeting under a buttonwood tree, which is another name for a sycamore tree. They're fancy like that. They could do that. You know, these are 24 major traders at the time. They gather under this tree, and they come up with a Buttonwood Agreement. Essentially, that's the Declaration of Independence for finance. It's a major thing, and it cuts off the auctioneers. And as a result of the Buttonwood Agreement, they could now deal directly with each other. They could go up to John and Paul and trade directly with John and Paul and not have to deal with people in the middle, you know. So that worked out. This is May 17th, 1752. Buttonwood Agreement passes. Now, they got to have an official meeting place. That would make sense, right? So these 24 men signed the thing. It's a fancy secret occasion under a fancy sycamore tree. Over the next few years, they had to go from place to place and try to find a bunch of places where they could gather. Eventually, they found a place, 68 Wall Street, and that's where they started paying rent. It was a $200 rent charge, and that they would meet there, and that's where they would do their business. Now, $200 a month today sounds like nothing, but in the mid-1700s, that's quite a big deal, you know, pretty expensive, and they invest in it. Now, the Great Fire comes along, 1776, and it wipes out 700 buildings in this area. As you can tell from this time, there's so many fires happening. I mean, there's every story in this section of Manhattan from that time period is affected by some sort of a fire that happened, and it's always bad news, you know. We start with this like, Buttonwood Agreement, and there's a fire. And this is good news, and there's a fire. So there's the bad news here. Fire sweeps through downtown Manhattan. Again, 700 buildings get burnt down, including their headquarters. This is pretty sad, you know, they all weep and they try to find new places, and they gather in a bunch of different areas. But we fast forward late 1800s, and the market is doing really well. I mean, this is like a time of prosperity for America. The market is doing like, it's beastly. Remember, we learned this before, it's bullish. I don't think anybody says that anymore, but we're just gonna, do they say that? Yeah, say it's bullish. Market is really high, and they find, now we finally have a reason for an official, I mean like for real headquarters. So they hold this competition, and this guy, George Post, not the cereal guy, George Post is the architect, right? Everybody knows that. I'm just acting smart. And George Post comes up with this amazing plan, and he wins the competition. 1903, this building comes to life. It's a majestic building. What I like about it, these are not my thoughts, I just read them. But what I like about it is that it's a fixed structure, you know? In a market that's, in an industry that's constantly going up and down, and there's no real security. You can't really predict what finances are going to be like unless you're JP Morgan. You can't really know. And so it's nice to have a structure that just sits there, and it's like this mighty, bam, New York Stock Exchange. And that's exactly what George Post created. It's pretty impressive. I don't have to say that. You can just see it. It's amazing. And windows are super high. Windows rise 72 feet in the air. When it opened, it was one of the largest open spaces in America, indoor open spaces. It was just a huge, you know, trading room, and it was pretty impressive. I wish that I could. They used to do tours. They don't do tours anymore, which is really disappointed. I wish we could see, but you could just turn on CNN or Bloomberg channel, and you can kind of get a deal of the mess and the stress. Speaking of stress, George Post was a smart man, and I don't know exactly if this is his idea, but what they had when it first opened was an in-house hospital for all the stressed out traders, which is a great idea. I mean, eventually they got rid of it, but I feel like they should kind of bring it back. And if they don't make it a hospital, they should make it like a Zen room, you know, like a meditation room where they could just come in and they have like this Buddhist monk welcome everybody in. It's like or maybe even better, like a Hawaiian, like big Hawaiian guy welcoming these guys in. But at the time they didn't have that. You know, imagine like out of a stressed out day, you come in and the guy's like aloha, and you just sit on this like thing and sip like pina coladas. That was the equivalent of what they had back then, the hospital, which they had in-house, which is pretty smart, you know, pretty smart thing. So it's interesting how they go from place to place and place to place, and they finally have this structure. Also interesting to me how they were pretty bold in gathering under this tree. Pretty cool. They gather under this tree like a bunch of schoolboys, buttonwood agreement, and eventually we got this amazing, nice building. Pun intended. NYSE, New York Stock Exchange. Welcome